Do in my Morim Mulukotim, this is in the second Chelik, and this is the seventh Mamer. The Mamer is Padah Beshalom Nafshi Mikrovli, and the Mamer was said on Shabbos Parshas Vayetze Yud Kislev Tovshin Memvov, and later on it was published in the booklet for Tes Yud Kislev, the year of Tinosei, in Tovshin Nun Aleph. That was in honor of the Tes Kislev, the birthday of the Mittler Rebbe in year Tov Kuf Lamed Daled, and his Yom HaHilula in the year Tov Kuf Peiches, and also in honor of Yud Kislev, the day of redemption of the Mittler Rebbe in the year Tov Kuf Pei Zayin. And the booklet was published on Sunday, Parshas Vayishlach Shnas Hey Tinose. So in this Maimer, the Rebbe first starts off by explaining the special shaykhs of Padah Beshalom to the Mittler Rebbe's Geula. The Rebbe says all the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe Yud Kislev and Yud Tes Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz are all connected to Padah Beshalom. But then the Rebbe says specifically the Mittler Rebbe's Geula, Yud Kislev, always comes out the Shir Tilim every year in Padah Beshalom Nafshi. And then the Rebbe brings out that the fact that the Mittler Rebbe in his Maimer emphasizes that the redemption is done Beshalom, Padah Beshalom Nafshi. As he explains, that means that also for the Mittler Rebbe there was this idea of Padah Beshalom Nafshi, which the Rebbe is going to explain how, even though it refers to David HaMelech, and still it's also the future, how it all goes together, as the Rebbe would develop this idea in the mind. Look inside now. B'siyayta d'shmaya, Shabbos Parshas Vayetze, Yud Kislev, Hey Tov Shimlan Bom. So, Padah Beshalom Nafshi Mikrovli Kiberabim Hoyim Modi. So this is in chapter in Tehillim. This is in Perik Nun Hey Posik Yutes. So this was said by David HaMelech, and David HaMelech said it about his own redemption. So V'yodua, even though he spoke about his redemption, but this would apply to the redemptions of others, and particularly in our case of the Rebbe's, V'yodua. And it's known, the noise of lepashtus ha'inyan, in addition to the simple idea, Shaposuk zeh Mar David benegei labadi shaloi, that this pasuk David says, as it relates to his redemption, Shakodesh Baruch Hu Poda Oisoi mehamilchomes shabo olav, that the Eibishter freed him, redeemed him from the wars that came upon him. This is the pshat that Rashi brings down on the pasuk. That was the Padah Beshalom from the war. So that's the simple thing we're talking, simple idea. The pasuk is talking about David HaMelech. But Merumas b'pasuk zeh, but also in this pasuk is hinted Gam hal p'dio shel kamo tzadikim, also the redemption of many tzadikim. Some tzadikim are hinted in the pasuk of Padah Beshalom. Umikol shikein. And for sure, not only should it apply in a way that this pasuk means them as well, but if they said that pasuk during their redemption, for sure it applies to them. Because for sure, the redemption of those tzaddikim that said this pasuk at the time that they were redeemed, that it applies to them. And therefore, as the Mittler Rebbe will explain in the Maimers, the great level of Beshalom Nafshi, that applies also to these tzaddikim, especially those who said these psukim. Ulahoyir, so the Rebbe said, want to point out, Shekol Shebechol Gimul Hageulis the Rebbe Seinu Nisienu. First, the Rebbe is going to say all of the Rebbes, the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe who were incarcerated and are connected to this pasuk. And the Rebbe is going to bring up, but especially the Mittler Rebbe, as the Rebbe continues to explain. So first, the Rebbe says that the whole Gimel HaGeulos, the Rabbi Seinu Nisiyin, in all of the three redemptions of our Rebbes, our leaders, which is Geulas, Admor Hazokim, Beyutas Kislev, the Alter Rebbe's redemption, the Geula, the freedom that was given to the Alter Rebbe on the 19th of Kislev, and Geulas Admor HaMtzoi, and the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe, Beyut Kislev, on the 10th of Kislev, Geulas, and also Kuveit Kedushas Mericham Admur, my father-in-law, the Rebbe, on Yud Beis Tammuz. So we know that Amru Balagula Pasuk Zebiyem Shenigalu. These masters of the redemption, those who were redeemed, in these three incidents, the Rebbes said this verse on the day that they were redeemed. How do we know that? I mean, how does that fit? How do you know they said posik, punk that posik? So the Rebbe, it boils down to the Alter Rebbe. It says beferish in his letter, Benegei legula sadmur azokim b'yutus Kislev, as it pertains to the redemption of the Alter Rebbe into Kislev Yadua. It's known mashikosu admur azokim b'geres hakodesh shaloi, that which the Alter Rebbe writes in his holy letter. And it says, Kishakori Sibesefer Tehillim, when I was reading in the book of Tehillim. The Pasuk Padah Beshalom Nafshi, and the verse Padah Beshalom Nafshi, Chulu Yotzosi Beshalom, Mahashem Shalom. That's when I went out in peace from Hashem who is peace. So he says beferish that he was reading the Pasuk of Padah Beshalom. So definitely this Pasuk is related to the Alter Rebbe. He read it then. As far as the Geulas Admor HaMtzoi, B'negei Legulas Admor HaMtzoi B'yud Kislev. Look there. So over here, we don't have a very clear, specific, even though the Rebbe brings down in other places in the Mamer that in Beis Rebbe it says that the Mittler Rebbe also says that, but I guess that's not so much authenticated. But the Rebbe brings down the idea that Yodua, it's known, Sharabeseinu Nisienu Hayoemrim Shiur Tehillim Kimoshe Nechlak Li Me'achodesh, that our Rebbes, our leaders, would say the portion of Tehillim as it's divided by the day of the month. So on the 10th of the month, which in that case it was the 10th of Kislev, the Mittler Rebbe was saying the Shir Tehillim from the 10th of Kislev, or the 10th of the month, that was 10th of Kislev. We know that they would be saying the Shir Tehillim. The Rebbe brings the source for there from a letter of the Friedrich Rebbe about this, that the Rebbes would say the Shir Tehillim of the day. B'kiv on Shabbos Padah Beshalom Nafshi. Since the verse of Padah Beshalom Nafshi B'shir Tehillim Achotshi D'Yom Asiri L'Chodesh, it's in the monthly portion of the 10th of the month is the Pasuk Padah Beshalom. Perek Nun Hey is on the 10th, the portion of the 10th of the month. So we need to say, therefore, that in the day of redemption, which is the 10th of Kislev, he said this pasuk. So that's because it comes out on that day. What about the Friedrich Rebbe? The Friedrich Rebbe's Geula is on Yud Beis Tammuz. We can't say that it's the Shir Tehillim Chodshi. But the Rebbe adds that there are certain situations, in addition to the Shir Chodshi, they would say the Shir Shavui, as the Tehillim is divided into the days of the week. And Perek Nun Hey of Tehillim comes out on Tuesday, which was Yud Beis Tammuz. As that pertains in connection to the redemption of my father, the Rebbe, on Yud Beis Tammuz, Yadu Minhag Rabbi Seinu Nisienu. it's known, the custom of our Rebbe's, our leaders, that during times and special situations, and of course, being incarcerated was a special situation for the Friedrich Rebbe, they would add to say, Hashir Tilim K'meshenechlek Limei Hashavua. They would say the portion of Tilim as it's divided in the days of the week. Noisaf al Shir Tilim Achotchi, in addition to the saying the monthly portion, they would also say the Tehillim for the day of the week. Since the setup, what day of the week was Yud Beis Tammuz in the year Tofresh Pezayin, which is Shnas HaMaiser Vagula? That was the year of the incarceration and redemption. Hoysa b'yoyim hashlishi b'shavua. That was on Tuesday. Va'aposik Padah Beshalom nafshi. And the verse of Padah Beshalom nafshi, b'shir Tehillim hashavui, the yoyim hashlishi b'shavua, is in the portion of Tehillim weekly of the Tuesday, on every Tuesday. That's the way it's set up. That where the Perek Nun Hey is, the Pasuk Padah Beshalom. Move on. Shabal HaGeula, the Yud Beis Tammuz, Amar Pasuk Zeh B'Yom Geulosei. So it was understood that the Bal HaGeula, the Friedrich Rebbe, said this Pasuk on the day of his redemption. So these were all proofs and conclusions that the Pasuk of Padah Beshalom Nafshi was recited on the day of redemption by the Mittler Rebbe and by the Friedrich Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, of course, it says beferish that he was reading that Pasuk. Yet the Rebbe is giving the Mamer Padah Beshalom Nafshi a Yud Kislev. He wants to make a special connection to Yud Kislev, to the Mittler Rebbe's Geula, because the fact that it's the monthly shiur of Tehillim, and we say the monthly Tehillim, so that means that every year we say again Padah Beshalom Nafshi. There's a very strong connection to Yud Kislev when we celebrate the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe. By the Alter Rebbe, that was the one-time thing. He was reading it then. By the Friedrich Rebbe, that was at that time, it was on a Tuesday. But who says that it was, but not on a regular basis? That's the Rebbe says stronger. And when he's saying the Maimer is by the Mittler Rebbe. Explained elsewhere. Shahashayich is the Geulas Yud Kislev Leposik Padah Beshalom Nafshi. That the connection of the redemption of Yud Kislev to the Pasuk Padah Beshalom Nafshi he beinyan echad. In one aspect, Od Yoser Mahashayches the Geulas Yud Kislev Yud Beis Tammuz LePasuk say it's more than the connection of the redemption of Yud Kislev Yud Beis Tammuz to this Pasuk. The Kivon Shapasik Zeh Hu B'Shir Tilim the Yom Hasidi LeChodesh. Since the Pasuk of Padah Beshalom is on the portion of the 10th of the month, the pasuk zel hagula Yud Kislev. So the connection of this pasuk Yud Kislev, he mudgeshes b'chol shana v'shana. It's emphasized every year. So the Rebbe, to sum it up, says that Padah Beshalom has a connection to all redemptions, a special connection to Yud Kislev, in which the Rebbe is saying this Maimer, and therefore that's the connecting piece, especially to the Mittler Rebbe. And now the Rebbe will go and explain from the Mittler Rebbe what advantage, the greatness of this pasuk Padah Beshalom Nafshi. And since we're saying that Padah Beshalom Nafshi, as the Mittler Rebbe explains with regards to David HaMelech, we have to apply it also to the Mittler Rebbe himself, who is hinted in this pasuk, because the Padah Beshalom Nafshi, and we will see the awesome, great level of the Padah Beshalom Nafshi of the Mittler Rebbe and what it means, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Base. Hine Yadua Habiur the Bal Hageula b'Maimore Dibur HaMaschil. It's known the explanation of the Master of Redemption of the Mittler Rebbe, in his Mamer that opens up with this opening with Padah Beshalom Nafshi, Shenitfas B'Sifrei Sharei Teshuva, that is printed in his Sefer called the Gates of Teshuva, Sharei Teshuva. What does the Mittler Rebbe say? Mittler Rebbe explains, we're going to go through now the explanation with the Rebbe's additions. That what is the emphasis in the posuk of redemption of nafshihi? Noisef al inyan hapedia. In addition, just to the redemption itself, but there's also an emphasis gam be'oifen hapedia. There's an emphasis how the redemption. We don't just say poda nafshi, but we say poda b'sholem nafshi. Sha'abediya hi b'sholem b'loi milchama klalu klal. The redemption is in a peaceful way without any war at all. There's no war. Now, the Rebbe will explain, come around, the Chayre, we will see David HaMelech had wars and he waged a lot of wars. But first, we will see when is Shalom. Shalom was really by Shlomo, whose name is Shalom. And real Shalom will be La'asir Lavai. And how do we say this, that Padah Beshalom by David HaMelech, who is not seemingly the real level of Shalom? And we're saying that by Shalom, by David, it's the way Shalom, as the Mittler Rebbe explains, will be in the future. The soul of David says Padah Beshalom, takenat in Bizman Hazeh, but it's still, the Rebbe says, has to fit with the simple pasuk. And the Rebbe says that also Bizman Hazeh, in a hidden way, was also B'Shalom, even though in an open way, by David, there wasn't the full level of Shalom, as the Rebbe will continue. But first, the Rebbe brings from the Mittler Rebbe to explain what does it really mean, Shalom. That it means that there's no war at all. And he explains over there, sometimes you get peace because you beat the opponent, and so it can't do anything about it. But sometimes you do peace that you subdue the opponent, that doesn't oppose anymore. If you just beat him, he's still there. He can once again try to fight. But when you subdue him, you're mavatal, then there's no more an opponent over there. So the idea of Padah Beshalom means it's not just that you won the war, that you beat him, but it means that you were mavatal. Varshom Shamitis Inyan Hasholim, the true concept, the true idea of peace, that he has no opponent at all. Similar to what was in the days of Shlomo. All the goyim were subjugated to him, they were bottled, no opponents. And as the Rebbe will explain, even by Shlomo, it was because of the great power and light of Shlomo, there was no opposition, but they weren't turned around. Turned around will be lost in love. So the Rebbe explains, why is that called still? So the Rebbe adds now to the Mittler Rebbe, why do we say that the goyim were bottled, that is why he's Shalom? So what he means to say here, the kol's man sheyesh lo menagdim, as long that there are opponents, even if they don't actually fight with them, because upon them falls the fear and the dread, so the opponents don't fight with him, but there's still opponents there. Then that's not true idea of shalom. Because if there are opponents, yesh efsharus u'nesinus makom l'mulchama, there is still a possibility, and there's still room. There could be war, so that's not really shalom. V'amitis in shalom hu, but the real idea of shalom is lo rak shebepoil lo yeshna milchama. It is not only that in actuality there is no war. There's also no possibility and there's no room for war. As long as you did not get rid of the opponent, there is still an opponent. So even though he may not fight you, but there's always a potential that he should go fight you. But only if there is no more opponent, then that's considered shalom because you know there's not going to be any possibility for war. That's the Rebbe explains why the Mittler Rebbe says that all the nations were bottled him. There was no more opponent over there, and that was specifically the level by shalom was Davki by Shloima. The Pasuk Padah Beshalom is written by David, but the Rebbe will explain in a minute. But the Mamer says that really Shalom was by Shlomo Melech, and that's why the Rebbe continues. And this is why we say that the idea of peace was by Shlomo and not by David, even though David won the wars, but he did not remove, he wasn't mevatel the opponents. And that's actually why he's called Shlomo. The real level of Shalom is by Shlomo. Because there was peace in his days, meaning there was no opponents. For all the nation became negated because of Shlomo, because of the power of his greatness. And when the opponent is negated, then there is no even room, as Rebbe explained, there's no even possibility to wage war because he's no more there, there's no opponent. That is the true level of Shalom. So it's only by Shloima that we call him Shalom, called Shloima Shalom Hayabiyamov, because there was this battle to go. Mashenkin by David, over there was not this battle. There was opponents that he beat. And that's why the Eibishter says to King David, when he wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, the Eibishter tells him, you will not build the home for my name, you're a man of war. Now, at that point, when David HaMelech was ready to build the Beis Hamikdash, it says Hashem already let him go. He was able. He won. He was victorious over all of the opponents. So, why do we say that Eibishter tells him? No, the Eibishter tells him, you're a man of war. Why? But he won the war, but now we understand he wasn't mevatel the enemies. Even though that at that point when David wants to build the Beis Hamikdash, he was in a situation of relaxed. That Eibishter let him off from all of the enemies that surrounded him. He was able to live in peace now. So why does the Eibishter say to him, Ishmul Chomes Ato? Well, for the exact point we said before. The menucha of David came by him being victorious, beating in all the wars. But it's not that the enemies became negated. That happened by Shlomo. V'kivon shebiyom of nishru adayim menagdim. And since during Shloimo's days there were still, David's days there were still menagdim. V'yesh nisinas mokim she'ilchamu, and there is possibility, there is room for them to wage war. This is not the true idea of peace and relaxation. This is when it says Beshalom, the inyan hapadiyah Beshalom ushamanagim is battle. Because real shalom is when the menagid is not there, not the way it's by David. I know we have right ways the questions, but David HaMelech is saying Padah Beshalom. Well, we have to wait. The Rebbe is gonna. The Mamer explains that with regards to David in a minute. The Rebbe brings down what the Rebbe's explanation. But right now we're explaining what does really Shalom mean. So we're saying that Shalom means the Shalom that was in the time of Shlomo, which there was no opponents, as opposed to the time of David, even though he was victorious and they still let him peace after all the wars. That's not Shalom because the Menagdim were still there. It was only by Shlomo that the Menagdim were bottled. That's why that's really Shalom. And the Mittler Rebbe says further in the Mamer that even by Shlomo it's not yet the ultimate Shalom, because he was mevatel because of the power of Shlomo, but they themselves did not turn around. They're still, as of themselves, wasn't the level that they turned around to become good. They were evil in this battle. They don't function. They're not opponents. They don't function. But the real peace will be lost in Lovei when Mashiach comes, in which there will be no spirit of impurity. They will really be totally wiped away from the world. And the Mamer continues, the Padah Beshalom Nafshihu, that the true idea of Padah Beshalom Nafshi is she'elu shehoyu mekoidim soinim umenagdim. Those who were previously enemies and opponents, heim nasim oivim, they turn them around, that they become friends. They become people that love you. The inyan zeh, that concept, hu l'maylo gam mesholem shahaya b'mei Shlomo. This is even higher than the peace that was in the days of Shlomo. Shahasholem shahaya b'mei Shlomo hu shekulam nizbatlu mitzad hagilui. The sholem that was in the days of Shlomo was that they all became subjugated because of the force, the revelation of light. But they weren't turned to Kedusha. But the true concept of Sholem, Shegam Hamenagid Nepach Kedusha, that also the opponent is turned to Kedusha, that will be in the future to come. Basically, that even the fact that there's no opponent, but if there is no opponent because of the force of Gilui Oir, that's not yet the ultimate Shalom. The real Shalom is that the enemy becomes a friend. That's only going to happen in the future to come. Kosov, as the Pasuk says. Then I will turn for all the nation a very clear language. They'll all serve one shoulder, all together with the Yidden, the nations, and to serve Hashem shoulder to shoulder in the future to come, meaning they'll be turned around totally to Kedusha. Okay, so the question that we want to know, if this is only going to be when the Geula Hasidah, Umasha Omar David Padah Beshalom Nafshi, explains the Mittler Rebbe. So why did David say Padah Beshalom Nafshi? Hagam shebiyom of Lingis Batlo Hamanagdim, even though the opponents were not negated, it's only by Shlomo. And for certainly they weren't yet turned around to Kedusha. The inyan that idea of turning around to Kedusha wasn't even by Shlomo, and only La'asilavi. So why is he saying David HaMelech Padah Beshalom? And Vur Mamer the Balagula is explained the Mamer Balagula. Shezekoyi al nefesh David k'moshe yiya losi lovi. Padah Beshalom that he's saying goes on David nefesh. Padah Beshalom nafshi is when, as it's going to be losi lovi. So he was saying it now, but it really represents the way the soul of David is going to be losi lovi. Tak at this point, it wasn't Padah Beshalom. Okay, so the Rebbe will explain this also nowadays. But first, the Rebbe wants to make his point that this level in Padah Beshalom, that Beshalom, the highest level, the way it's going to be lost in Love, is really applies to the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe, who was saying the Padah Beshalom, and his redemption is hinted in this pasuk, as the Rebbe built the connection before. And when the Mittler Rebbe says about the David HaMelech, that the real Shalom, in the highest level, that there is the enemies are turned around to Kedusha, this applies also to the Mittler Rebbe. As the Rebbe brings down, Vapi HaYedua, Bepirush Mamer Azal, as we know in the explanation of the saying of our sages, it says in the Mishnah, Nifroi min ha'odom midaite v'shaloi midaite. That basically means, Pashut is that the person you collect from him, he has to pay the punishment, whether he agrees knowingly or unknowingly. So we explain over there that, first of all, we show the person sort of a scenario, and we ask the person, in a scenario like this, what do you think the penalty should be? What should it be in Ephraim? And the person knowingly says, okay, the guy, if this is what they did, this needs to be the punishment. So that means knowingly, medaita, he says. But it's also b'shaloi medaita, he doesn't know. Then we turn it around and we say, well, you're actually the person who did this, and by giving the verdict on somebody else, that medaita is shaloi medaita, that it's talking about yourself. You have brought about that nifroim, that verdict by yourself. And this is also a similar interpretation of that Befirush Loshna Mishnah Din Vecheshvan, also to explain the Mishnah Din Vecheshvan. So normally we would have a cheshvan. You have to first make an accounting, and then you can pass judgment. Here it says Din Vecheshvan, and the explanation is that you first pass along the judgment. You don't know we're talking about you. You make a din on somebody, and then we make the cheshbon. Say, that's actually you. The kasher odom oimer psak dina shel odom achar. When you give the judgment, the ruling on a other person, who poisek bazeh gam al atzma, you end up ruling about yourself. So since the Mittler Rebbe gave out the pshat of Padah Beshalom nafshi as it pertains to David HaMelech, he's really giving it out for himself as well. Haripsak dine shel admur hamtzoi b'mamorei dibra maschil Padah Beshalom nafshi. So the ruling of this judgment, as the Mittler Rebbe gives it out in the Mamer of Padah Beshalom nafshi, the Pirush Padah Beshalom nafshi hu. He says what it really means, Padah Beshalom nafshihu. First of all, Shamanagid Mizbatel Kasholem Shohoyim Meshlema, that the opponent is negated as it was in the days of Shlomo. Not only beaten, but he was negated, Mizbatel. And then even more, you say to Mizu, Shamenagid Nepech Lo'oyed, that the opponent turns into a person that loves you, to a friend. Kasholem sheyil also love, like the peace is going to be in the future. Upsak din gam benegei leinyan Padah Beshalom nafshi b'gaul shaloi. That is a ruling, even though he gave it about David HaMelech, this is really ruled to the Padah Beshalom nafshi, which is in his redemption, which is the Geula of Yud Kislev, the Geula of Yud Kislev. Move on, gam benegei leinyan Padah Beshalom nafshi. This, from this we also understand as it relates to the idea Padah Beshalom Nafshi Shebagula Diutas Kislev, Ubagula Diut Bistamus, the redemption of Diutas Kislev and the redemption of Bistamus. The Inyan Hasholem Shebegulis Elo. What is the idea of Sholem in these redemptions of Yud Kislev, Yutas Kislev Bistamus? Ushamenagid Mizbatl, that the opponent is negated. The Yisayim Mizu Shul Nepach Lo more that he turns to a friend. So this is really what the Padah Beshalom Nafshi. And okay, so this talking about David's neshama, the way it's going to be lost in love. But in the pasuk, we're talking about the Padah Beshalom Nafshi from this redemption of the situation of David HaMelech. The Rebbe was going to go now to explain that even though we are saying that it's lost in love, but really in an obscure, hidden way, it's really now. So all these things that we're talking about, the Ma'ila of Padah Beshalom, even though the Mittler Rebbe says it'll be the nefesh of David in Los Ilavai, but really it is still applicable right now, as we will continue to learn in Ois Gimel.